So let me just make 3 quick points and then invite our distinguished panelists to make their statements. We're running out of time. We're running behind, actually. And so my goal would be to make up a little bit for that lost time. And the format I will follow is I will give one round of statements, but slightly longer than usual. And that might just be it. And then we will open to the floor, and then we will come back with a closing sort of reaction to what we hear from the floor, and also your closing statements. So 6 to 7 minutes of statements from each of our panelists, open the floor, and then conclude. So hopefully that will be much more efficient than aiming to do a sort of a 2-round kind of a discussion. The first point that the program also notes is to acknowledge that the well-accepted role of think tanks is to promote, foster evidence-based policies, and also provide this safe space for ideas and debate that then legitimize or delegitimize certain policy choices. And folks who are engaged in this exercise also help develop future cadres of policymakers and even politicians. The second point to make here is these think tanks, these so-called knowledge actors in South Asia, also shape political economic processes in South Asia. They often provide a neutral forum for dialogue between groups, between countries, societies, private sector. So it could be the government, could be the NGOs, civil society. So this power of convocation that think tanks can often exercise is very useful to complement the formal processes often mediated through government. So this is where the third point comes in, where think tanks often complement the official processes through track 2 measures. A wonderful example is, of course, South Asia Economic Summits. For the last 14 occasions, everyone from South Asia, representing different parts of our countries, are here talking to each other and making this point that people-to-people ties, non-governmental bonds remain exceptionally strong, but the formal official channels have not worked. This is what has resulted in some discussion this time on how we may be deviating from the overall regional project and talking much more in bilateral and sub-regional terms. But there are challenges. So accepting that many think tanks have done wonderful work in the past decades, and nonetheless, the issue of resource crunch is there. How do think tanks sustain themselves? Where is the money coming from? Are there innovative ways other than handouts from development partners or governments? It is increasingly being realized that there is limiting civic space in some of our countries, where you may be censored, you may be watched, you may be intimidated in saying or not saying certain things. So how do think tanks, which are supposed to say what the evidence points out, in an environment which is politically suffocating? And therein comes this pressure to remain neutral. Now, one thing I've noted is we often take examples of American think tanks or European think tanks as being very professional, and we often emulate ourselves. The names like Brookings and Heritage and all that, come into mind. But it has to be noted that they are not neutral. So I actually struggled with this for a bit because, Brookings is left-wing, Heritage and American Enterprise Institutes are right-wing. So yet they are known to be fairly credible and well-respected and, known to be quite influential. So therein lies the power of evidence. So you may be value-based in what you preach, but as long as the evidence that you put out can be contested, can be replicated, can be verified and vetted, I think that is the minimum dharma of a think tank. So let me stop there, and we have some I'll pose 3 general questions that our organizers have asked us to be covered. So, key lessons from historical roles of think tanks in South Asia. Are there examples, precedences that we should, not lose sight of? This is almost like an intellectual heritage that we continue and consolidate and recognize. Just now, Professor Rehman Soban was talking about, how the earlier generation of South Asian thought leaders had pressed ahead with this idea of South Asia regional integration. So it's a time perhaps for the next generation to take that agenda on. So what are those lessons, in your mind? Institutions, forums, panels that have done good work that we need to recognize and take forward. What can they do today given the constraints that I just mentioned, resource, limited civic space, and this challenge to remain fairly level-headed, right? I don't like the word neutral, but fairly level-headed. And finally, how do you navigate impartiality while working on sensitive topics to uphold credibility? So these are some of the general questions. So I will allow each of our panelists to make their statements, 6 to 7 minutes, and then we'll see how we do with time.